Hello and welcome to the second in this series of instructional videos all about building reports using Westbury's Service Management Intelligence Suite. Last time I gave you an introduction to report building. This time we're going to cover something called the accountable versus non-accountable report, which is very useful for reasons that will become clear. Now I'd like you to imagine a scenario. It's a very Mickey Mouse scenario, but I'm sure you're smart enough to extrapolate it into something more complex and realistic. Here we go. So Dave is a user. Not in a Narcotics Anonymous sense, more of a business user sense. Although who knows what he gets up to on the weekends. A pretty shady character. Anyway, so Dave is a user who has a broken mouse. So he logs a call with his help desk. That call gets assigned to Bob. Now Bob spends 5 minutes and looks at the call and then realises that he needs more information from Dave. So he fires an email off to Dave asking whether it's a USB mouse or a PS2 mouse. 3 weeks go by. Eventually Dave gets back to Bob and says it's a USB mouse. Bob asks if it's plugged in. It's not, so he plugs it in and hey presto, the mouse works and Bob can close the call. Now to the untrained eye, or to someone using simple views in Service Manager, it looks like Bob took 3 weeks to close a call about a broken mouse, and that does not look good. And this is a situation that crops up a lot, so over a period of time it looks like your help desk staff are taking much longer to close their calls than is actually true. And that's because they're only accountable for a certain amount of time. Bob was only accountable for 5 minutes of that 3 weeks, and the user was accountable for the rest. Now, how do we get to that information? Well, there's one of two ways. Firstly, you could delve into the database and go through all the files and look at the timestamps and try and figure out when a call went from being on accountable time to being non-accountable time, or vice versa, and get your calculator out and start adding up. But that's going to take a lot of time, especially if you're dealing with a high call volume. More easily is to build this accountable versus non-accountable report. I told you it was going to be cool. So let's dive straight into it. Hopefully you've watched part one of these videos, so you're familiar with the user interface. I'm not going to go over that again. What I will show you before we start is the actual report that we're going to end up with, so you know what we're working towards. So here we have information about Bob's performance broken down into the different companies that he's dealing with calls from. So he's working for an outsourced help desk. And we can see the average accountable time of his calls, the average call duration for his calls, and the number of calls he's dealing with. And we see it both in a table format and as a bar graph. Okay, that's what we're working towards. So let's dive straight in and create this report. Okay, so what is the information that we need? Well, we need to know about the number of incidents, and we need to know about the overall duration of those calls. So let's just dip into calendar calculations here, and let's choose the hours between open and close date object. Now, as I said, the calculation is all done for you in SMI Suite, so we can go into clocks and go through a few folders here, and we can find the total accountable time in hours. So that's already calculated for you, and we can add that in. Now we want to make it interesting, so we're also going to look at the the priority of the calls that Bob is dealing with. And we also want to look at the company name because he's working with this outsourced help desk. Now last time I showed you filtering a query by a date range. What we want to do this time is just look at Bob's calls. So we're going to go into the instant assignment and find assignee name, and we're going to drag and drop that across to the query filters pane. Last time we were using constant values. We were typing in a range of dates. We're going to do something different this time. I'm going to click this button. I'm going to choose values from list, and that's going to return a list, pick list of all the possible values for assignee name. So essentially all of your help desk support staff. This is a sample database. It's not terribly realistic. There aren't that many names in here, but here is good old Bob, unfortunately named help desk. Could be worse. There's old Susie Supertech. She was actually just plain old Susie Super. Then in June she got married to Billy Tech, and they've done a double-barreled kind of thing. So now she's Susie Supertech. But Bob's okay. He's always been Bob Help Desk. His father was John Help Desk. So we've selected Bob Help Desk, and we're going to use this right chevron to add him to the list on the right. You can add multiple values here, so you can pick several assignee names, but we're just interested in Bob. Okay, there we go, we're ready to run our query, so I'm going to click Run Query, and hopefully it's not going to take too long. It's not, it's pretty quick. And there we go, we have all that information in a table. Now really, to get to the stage we want to get to, we need to do a couple of other steps before we look at the report. So I'm going to ignore this report for the moment. In fact, I'm going to right click on that tab and do Delete Reports, and it's going to ask me if I'm sure. Sounds like my wife, and I am. Now what we need to do is, we have the total call duration and we have the total accountable time, but we don't really know an average accountable time or call duration. So we want to look at, across all his calls, what was his average for both of those factors. So what we need to do is create a couple of variables. Now variables are ways of performing calculations on the data that your query has returned. So we can take the total hours between open and close date, and we can divide that by a total of the number of incidents to give us that average figure. So I'm just going to click on Data Variables, and it's going to bring up my variable editor. First off, we need to give this variable a name. So first we're going to do the average call duration. And this is a simple math formula, and you actually have a list. It's a lot like Excel if you're one of those geeks like me who kind of gets off on long Excel formulas or formulae, if we've had the benefit of a classical education. It's a lot like Excel, and we actually do have a list of all the functions and operators available to you. So that makes it a lot easier. So what are we going to do? We're going to do, first we need a sum of the hours between open and close dates. So I'm just going to scroll down my functions list until I get to S and sum. There we go. You can do this one of two ways. You can double click and it'll populate it into the formula bar like so, or you can, if you know what you want, just type that straight into the formula bar. So first we want to sum up the total of the hours between open and close dates, so just double click that and it goes in there. And we want to divide that, so I'm going to double click the divide symbol. I want to divide that by the sum of the number of incidents. There we go, and there's our complete formula for our variable. I'm going to click OK.